Hello and welcome to another video. In this tutorial, I'll be showing you how to make a dubstep in the style of Benga, inspired by his tracks 26 Basslines, Crunked Up and 0M2 from his 2008 album Diary of an Afro Warrior. The project files, samples and presets are available for a small contribution in the description. I had initially planned on doing a project based on Night with Koki, however I managed to find a recreation of Night online which is free to download, and I've linked this in the description. Firstly, I want to give a huge thanks to all my subscribers for helping me reach 10,000 subs. If you're not yet subscribed, now is a great time to do so, and consider liking the video if you learned something. You can also suggest any ideas for future tutorials in the comments. Our BPM is 140 and I'm interpreting this project as being in G Phrygian dominant, although you could also say it's in regular G Phrygian. Let's start with the kick. I've used an EQ to remove low mids and emphasize high mids. This helps the kick stand out in the mix. Next, we have the drums. Starting with the snare. This is a 909 style snare, similar to the sample Benga uses in 0M2. There's an EQ, and I'm using a technique where a reverb has its dry wet triggered by Max's envelope follower. I discovered this technique in the free Night project I mentioned earlier, although it's effectively a gated reverb. I've used the delay parameter within the envelope follower as extra pre-delay, so the transient of the snare still pops through. Then I have a monoing utility to ensure the snare reverb is mono compatible. Next we have the high drums. First we have the tambourine. Then we have the first hat. The second hat. And finally, the shaker. Since the kick and snare are usually so straight in dubstep, it's the high percussion which helps create the groove along with the bass line. Next, we have the drum effects. First, we have this crash, a timbal, and clap delay. These elements have various echoes applied. And this is something I experimented with in terms of rate, feedback, and dry wet. There's also serum effects reverb on the crash, and I like this reverb because it's glassy and digital sounding. You might have noticed the rolls. And these are inspired by Crunked Up, although I would use something like beat repeat if I wanted to get a little closer to Crunked Up's stuttering rolls. I found with this project that the rolls didn't really suit the sounds of a lot of the percussion hits. I've applied this dancehall groove to all the MIDI in the drums group. And you could say this is a nod to dubstep's dub origins. On the drums group, I've added vinyl distortion and saturation to add grip, and there's parallel compression. Finally, we have EQ plus reverb via Sende. Here I was again inspired by the Night project, choosing this Droney Cave preset from Live's hybrid reverb, although I have altered the reverb's parameters significantly. Next we have the basses. Let's start with bass 1. We've got these triplet rhythms, something common in dubstep. In massive, we have a square wave in oscillator 1, taken down by 2 octaves. And in oscillator 2, we have a saw, also taken down by 2 octaves. Both of the bass patches in this project use phase modulation, which is Massive's version of frequency modulation, with oscillator 2 being affected by the phase modulation. And I've also messed with the octaves here. I'll demo the phase modulation and how shifting octaves can dramatically alter a sound's timbre. There's a low pass filter with its cutoff modulated by envelope 1. I could have modulated the cutoff with an LFO, but I found it more flexible to use MIDI notes to dictate the bass's rhythm. There tends to be minimal resonance on these sounds. Then we have drive and EQ. I'm not sure if Benga used Massive on Diary of an Afro Warrior, but it was a popular synth used in dubstep around 2008. On the channel, we have EQ, removing mid-range, and an auto filter, which is cutting high frequencies. This stops the bass and the lead from clashing. Next, we have bass 2, which creates some tonal variation at the end of the loop. Here we have all 3 oscillators active. Oscillator 1 is a square wave taken down by 1 octave. Oscillator 2 is a saw wave taken down by 2 octaves. And oscillator 3 is a sine wave, also taken down by 2 octaves. The reason for oscillator 3 is that oscillator 2 is being modulated by the phase modulation, and this tends to reduce subfrequencies. This time I'm using envelope 1 to modulate the phase amount. The filter setup is similar to the previous patch, but with slightly more resonance. And again, we have the classic tube, although this time I've added some inserts. So we have bit crush and sample and hold, which are digital style effects, although both are pretty subtle. On the channel, there's an EQ, which is removing mid-range. On the group, there's an EQA, removing rumble, parallel compression, chorus, and a sub sidechain rack. And here I've split the bass's frequencies. So we have the kick only sidechaining the low frequencies. I'll leave a free version of this rack in the description. Reverb is applied via A. Next we have the effects. We have this impact, which is made in Serum. The noise oscillator is active, and there's a low pass filter with its cutoff modulated by LFOs 1 and 2. LFO1 is sweeping the filter down, whereas LFO2 is modulating the cutoff bidirectionally. And I've used the rise function as well, which means it takes a bar for the full amount of modulation. I've also used this smooth parameter, which makes LFO2's effect more subtle. There's also drive, fat, and resonance on the filter, with the pitch of the bright white noise being modulated by LFO3. This means there's a pitch drop at the start of the sound. In the effects, there's hyperdimension to add width, distortion, and EQ, which is removing lows. Then we have the riser and the reverse cymbal. On the group, there's vinyl distortion, drum bus, EQ, and a dubby echo. Reverb is applied via A. Finally, we have the lead. In 26 bass lines, Benga uses lots of octave jumps of varying note lengths for the lead melody, and that's what I've done here. I'm also utilizing these dark sounding chromatic relationships between the A flat and G notes. In Serum, we have a saw wave with its unison taken up to 3. And I've altered the detune and blend, as well as the phase and random, to try and replicate Benga's leads and to make sure it's consistent. With the detune and blend, I was trying to get the sound to the point where you can almost hear the individual voices of the synth, like in 26 bass lines. There's subtle microchord noise as well. The glide is fundamental to this patch, so always is activated in the Portamento tab. And in the effects, I'm using the downsampling algorithm in the distortion. On the channel, I've got a utility, monoing below 500 Hz, a Serum pans the unison voices, and a saturator because I wanted generic saturation alongside the bit crushing. Then I've used the gated reverb technique I showed earlier with the snare, or this is very similar. Finally, we have EQ and more reverb via A. And that's the video. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments, and I'll see you in the next one.